This is Lee Atkinson. I've got a 455 I'm about to put back into my 73, and actually I have several intake manifolds sitting here, and so I'm going to take this opportunity to take some measurements, hopefully help get rid of some misleading and some bad information that is on the internet. Okay, so I have a factory pre-EGR intake sitting on the motor right now. If you notice, it cants the carburetor forward. So what I've got, I've put some bolts in, and I have a piece of angle iron, and then I have actually taken an old valve cover and put a sheet of metal, so this is rigid, and then taped a piece of cardboard to it. And so I'm going to take some different colored markers and mark on the sheet of paper the angle and the position of the flange for each of these different intake manifolds, to kind of help people get an idea of how much different intake manifolds will raise or lower the carburetor and the air filter. Alright, so what I'm going to do, I've got the angle iron back against these two bolts, up against my plate. I'm going to make a vertical mark to show that's about where the center line for the back bolt goes. All right, and then okay, so this black line is the stock intake, and that gives you an idea of the angle of the carburetor. So I've got my wife videoing for me at the moment so I can show you my process. From here I'll let her get back to what she's doing, and I'll just swap intakes, and I will do the measurements with different colored pins so you can see what the different colored intakes are like. Okay. Not sure if I showed this earlier or not, but yeah, I've got the cardboard securely taped to the piece of metal that I have securely screwed to the old valve cover, so that way the measurements I take stay properly located without moving while I change intakes. Okay, I just did the performer intake, and anyway, the performer, even though front to rear is about the same as the factory, the rear is lower and the front is a little higher, and so you end up with a different angle than you do with the factory intake. Now, sitting here looking at the lines, it doesn't look to be that significant, but by the time you go to a air filter housing that's 16 inches in diameter, so it makes a difference, especially if you throw a hood scoop on. It makes the front sit high and the rear sit lower. Once I finish all the measurements, I'll try to extend these lines to kind of give a better idea how much of a difference it can make. Okay, this surprised me a little bit. This is a P4B intake. So that's that line. So it's actually a tiny bit more forward than the performer or the factory. Has a similar angle as the performer. I thought it had more of an angle, but my measurements state otherwise. 'Otherwise. Okay, big difference here. This is the Performer RPM. You can kind of see how my line matches up. And look here. You can see it's vastly different than the other three intakes. All right, a special guest on today's show. We have the Edelbrock SP2P with its teeny tiny little runners, and surprisingly, it is maybe a 1/4 inch further forward on the carburetor than the factory intake, and the angle is virtually identical. So the carb mounting on the SP2P is very close to the factory, just sits up a little bit higher. All right, our final contestant today. This is an old Tomahawk intake brought to us by Ken Ace Brewer, the former owner of Pacific Performance Racing, PPR. How's it going, Ace? Wish your business was still going. But Ace has moved on to non-Pontiac endeavors, making movies, B-movie television on Roku. If you get a chance to watch Ace, he has his own TV channel now. Anyway, this intake has been duplicated and produced by various Chinese people and sold under various names now. You can probably recognize it. Of course, I've taken the water crossover off. But look at this. Man, it is about 1/8 of an inch further forward than the factory intake. And that's the line. So it is, the carb mounting angle is virtually identical. This just moves the carburetor up maybe a 1/16 of an inch and forward maybe 1/8 of an inch from the factory intake. I never realized it was that close, but yeah, this intake puts the carburetor as close to factory as any of the aftermarket intakes that I have available to measure. So anyway, this is our final list. The black line is the factory intake. So the Performer changes the angle. The SP2P changes the angle. The P4B and the Performer change the angle. The SP2P, Tomahawk, and the factory intake are all actually pretty close to the same angle. And of course, the RPM is a whole different animal. It changes angle dramatically, raises the height dramatically. Anyway, hopefully you find this interesting. But yeah, if you want if you want your carburetor to be mounted about where the factory mounted it, and you want to go to a single plane, like if you have some good heads and whatnot, looks like the Tomahawk and its replicas will put you pretty darn close to the factory carb placement. Okay, quick summary of what we have here. So I took measurements, and roughly, again, this is not super precision measurements, but this will get you into the ballpark. So taking the factory intake, where the carburetor shifts from it, the rear of the carburetor mounting bolts, and the front of the carburetor mounting bolts. The Performer is shifted, the carburetor is in basically the same location as the factory. The rear is about a 1/4 inch lower than factory, and the front is about a 1/16 of an inch higher than factory. The P4B intake is about 3/8 of an inch shifted forward, 1/2 an inch lower in the rear, and 5/16 lower in the front. Performer RPM is shifted about 3/8 of an inch forward. Sits about an inch higher at the rear and about 1.25 inches higher in the front. The SP2P shifts about 5/16 forward. Again, that's there to there. And it's about 1/4 inch higher front and rear. Again, the grayish line and the black line, and they're pretty parallel. And then the Tomahawk, you can see the Tomahawk it's shifted about 1/8 of an inch forward, which you can see right there, and it sits maybe 1/16 of an inch higher because it runs really parallel to the factory intake. I was really surprised how close to the factory carb mounting that intake is. So I was going to extrapolate and make these lines longer to give you an idea about the air cleaner, but I think this gives you a pretty good idea. So yeah, so it's not that much of a difference in the angles, not as much as I thought. And I've got to say, I've recommended the P4B to people. I thought it was closer to the factory intake than what it is, so I've given some less than accurate information myself, so hopefully this helps all of us.